Good morning. It's great to see everybody here this morning. Happy Father's Day to all of our fathers here this morning. I know what an impact my own father's had on my life, and I'm very grateful for his influences. And I'm sure many of you out there have some great influences in your lives as well. As David mentioned, we're also very thankful for God, our Heavenly Father, this morning, and that we can be a part of His family. This morning, real quick, following the service for all of our fathers, we'll have a little gift for you, so make sure as you leave this morning out in the lobby to pick up your gift. But this morning, we're going to continue our series called One Hit Wonders, where we as a staff, we kind of picked one thing that's stuck out to us as a staff that we can share with you guys. And so Joe kicked us off a couple weeks ago. The church is a messy place, right? David last week shared that Jesus touches the untouchable. This morning, I want to share with you that we are created to stand out. Now, both Joe and David had these great one-hit wonders, right, that they played. Joe had the Macarena. He played it. People were out in the audience doing it, dancing. David last week gets up here and plays a song. He's busting a move up here. And I put together a team trying to figure out what can be my one-hit wonder. I got Bailey's help. I got Bethany, Mylan, Jill, everybody looking through all these different songs, and I never could find one. So I don't have a song to play, and frankly, after seeing David's moves, I cannot live up to that kind of dance anyway. But you are created to stand out this morning. And so if you have your Bible or your phone with you, I want you to turn to Matthew chapter 5. And we're going to be looking at verse 13 here in just a few moments. But first I want to show you a picture. Now when you see this picture, what is the first thing that immediately grabs your attention? Well, hopefully it's that red flower, right? This is a beautiful photograph that somebody's taken of this red flower in the midst of all these other blue flowers and that blue background. And immediately, as soon as I see that picture, my eyes are drawn to that flower. But I want you to look at this picture just a little bit differently this morning. I want you to pretend like you are that red flower right in the middle of that field, and all those other blue flowers around you are the people in this world. And the question is what makes you stand out? What makes you stand out? What about you gains people's attention in the world? And so some of you would probably say, well, my identity is what makes me stand out. And there are a lot of definitions for how somebody defines themselves. Most people define it as who I am, the being, or what a person is, right? That's your identity. So some of you may list some things like this. You may say my career, my family, my wealth, my creativity, my success. Maybe you're sitting here this morning, you say my failures are what has defined my lives, my ambition, my personality, right? My adaptability, my hobbies, all these different things you could use to describe your identity. And we could go on, but what if the answer to this question was an extremely simple one? Very, very simple, and it's this: what makes you stand out is that I'm a Christian. If you answered that question, it said, I'm a Christian, this makes me stand out. In Paul's second letter to the Corinthians, he describes what happens when we come into this saving relationship with Jesus. Paul says that our old identity disappears, it dies, and then in the new place, we are born again, right? We have this new identity, and he digs a little bit deeper in his letter to Colossians. He even says this when explaining our new identity, that we are hidden with Christ in God. Hidden with Christ in God. So this means that rather worrying about what's happened in the past, the things that used to define you as a person, you now are beginning to bring some of these heavenly qualities to your earthly lives. And so all these other things are dead, they're gone, and now you're linked up with Christ and God. And so in your mind, you may be thinking, well, Austin, that's great. I'm a Christian. I could sit here in the seat this morning, I'll say that, but can I really stand out in today's world if that's the answer to the question? And what does that even really look like? So Jesus gives us some examples in Matthew chapter 5, and he sure thought we could stand out, and he describes what that life is supposed to be. And so in Matthew chapter 5, right, like I said, he gives us things that help us stand out. And this passage is part of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Many of you have maybe heard that before, and it's traditionally one of these great sermons that Jesus preached, and it follows up in chapter 5, the Beatitudes. You guys have heard these. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for they will be comforted. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are those who are the poor in spirit, for the kingdom in heaven. Blessed are the meek, and it goes on, right? And so the Sermon on the Mount really serves as this in-depth picture of the moral expectations of God's children. And so he spends his time contrasting kind of the current religious beliefs, what the Pharisees and the scribes were teaching, and basically he adds in what God's definition for his children should be. And this was revolutionary teaching in Jesus' day. This was not what other people were saying. He was being different. So they taught, the Pharisees and the scribes taught, that to stand out, it all was all these external principles and ideas, that you had to obey the law, you had to obey all the rules, and it came down to your worth could be measured by how much you prayed, how much you gave, how much you fasted, and it was all on external ideas. Jesus, however, was telling these people, he was preaching, saying that all those things, they have a part, but it really matters as a Christian what flows from within. And then in verse 13, he cuts straight to what our identity is, what it means to be a Christ follower. Read 13 through 16 with me. He says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything, except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand. It gives light to everyone in the house, and in the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." So my first point this morning is we are to be different. So if you're following along the bulletin, we are to be different. Now that is not some shocking, amazing insight this morning that you never heard before, right? But we are called to be different. And Jesus tells us in that very first sentence that we are the salt of the earth. Everyone here knows what salt is, right? It's very common today. We use it to flavor and preserve foods. And Jesus often spoke in these kind of metaphors and parables because this would have immediately resonated with his audience. They knew exactly what salt was. Similar to what we do with it today, they were doing the same things. They used it to flavor and preserve food. However, it was much more valuable in Jesus' day than it is today. It wasn't as common. For example, if you were a fisherman, salt was so important to you. You go out that day, you get your catch, you pack all your catch in salt before you take it to the market, right? That kept it from spoiling. Even some of the Roman soldiers of the day were paid in salt once they performed their duties. So it had a type of value. And so Jesus, in one sentence, is telling his followers a few different things. One, you are valuable, right? You're valuable. That was a valuable thing. As a Christ follower, you have a lot of value as well. Two, you add distinctiveness and flavor to this life. Meaning, here in Kentucky, we love our salt. All right, in Southern Kentucky, you put it in the food before you cook it, then you put it on after you cook it, and then probably still doesn't have enough, and you pour some more on there, right? And so we all have some type of blood pressure issue, heart issue, because of all this salt we're eating. Now, have you ever had something without salt? Now, some of you in here, you might not, maybe you don't like the salt, but I'm just going to be honest with you this morning. If you don't put salt on my food, it's pretty bland, all right? It's pretty bland. It doesn't taste very good most of the time. And so Jesus is saying, you're the difference maker between something being good and something being bad. And then also, you're a preserver, right? Because we know salt is a preserver, so you're a preserver of society. You can keep this world from spoiling. Meaning, when you're a Christ follower, your actions, your attitudes, your words, right, and your character should be in such display when you're displaying honesty, kindness, integrity, truthfulness, helpful to be around, you're compassionate, right, loving. All these things help preserve our world and make it a better place. And as I was writing this, and I list all those things out, all these ideas and attributes that we should have, I got to thinking, and I Googled, are people today getting meaner? You turn on the news, seems like every day you see these things that are just not so good in our society. These mean people causing evil acts, and the news loves to display it, or you read it on your phone, and it just seems like we see hate displayed on a daily basis in various forms, right? It also seems people are less impersonal and a little bit more distant than they used to be. And I wanted to know if there was any truth to this. So go back to 1919, 1930s, 40s, 50s. Were people this mean? Were these same things happening? So as I searched through several different articles, it did seem like there were several that supported my thought. One article really stuck out to me, and there's kind of two parts to it. But the first part seen from psychology.com says, our world is becoming more divisive every day. People are angry about a lot of things, projecting that anger onto whomever or whatever they don't like at the moment. And it seems like it's for spurious reasons at best, meaning in a moment, somebody gets angry, right? They explode, and then something bad happens. But go on and listen to how he describes what we would consider these mean people. Mean people lack a purpose in life. When you have nothing going for yourself, you feel the need to try to control everything that crosses your path, including any real connection with people. This only leads to more and more frustration. Everyone has a gift. The key is to find a way to use it. Being famous, being popular, being rich isn't important, but feeling like you matter is. Feeling like you matter is. Now take those two thoughts from that writer and compare it to what Jesus is saying here, preaching to this audience. Jesus tells us we're valuable, we're distinct, right? And we are preservers. You have a place. So if you want to live a life without less frustration, more control, better connections, using your gifts, all these things, right? Essentially, in one sentence, when Jesus says you are the salt of the earth, he's telling you, you matter, right? You matter. And once you stand out like that, you're going to be different because you're created to stand out. Now, Jesus follows up this very first sentence, you're the salt of the earth, with a warning or kind of this be careful kind of statement, right? It says, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything, set to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. So while this was a value commodity, it's still not as pure as the kind of salt that we are used to using today. So due to all these impurities, once moisture got into this salt, it could easily get exposed, and then it would be no good. As Jesus says, they might as well throw it out and trample it underfoot. It would no longer taste good. It no longer could be used as this type of preserver. Essentially, it's worthless, right? Brings me to my second point this morning in your bulletin. If you're following along, it says this: don't be absorbed by the world. Don't be absorbed by the world. So Jesus gives this warning, and you've all seen a salt shaker, right? A lot of times in restaurants, they'll have some rice sprinkled in. That's for the moisture. But over time, once that moisture gets in, all that can break down and get sucked into that rice. And there's a clear distinction between these two things. There's a clear distinction between rice and salt. But once in a while, this can happen in our world. We begin to blend in. The salt goes bad, and all we have is just this rice. And that's exactly what Jesus is trying to tell us. If we become too much like the world, then we begin to blend in, and we become worthless. And there's several modern day ideas that can help absorb us if we're not careful. When we begin to put all these things before Christ, right, God now becomes second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth in order of what's important to us instead of number one. Here's some of the things we tend to place ahead of God. One, our identities, like I mentioned there in point one, our entertainment, our money, our possessions, our physical appearances, politics, sex, comfort, technology, family, influence, fame, right? Once again, we can make all these lists that people put ahead of God. And all these things are not necessarily bad things, right? If done in a godly way, and we put him first. But when we become a Christian, right, that relationship with Christ has to be more important than all these other things. Now, I'm hesitant here to go down this road this morning, but I'm going to, and I want to focus on a particular subject that I listed there, and that's this idea of politics. Politics is a hot-button issue. It's always been a hot-button issue, but now it's beginning to infiltrate into the church. And I'm not a big political person. Most of the time, when somebody asks me, what party do you follow, I don't even answer. I don't want to talk about it or have that discussion. But it does seem like today when the idea of politics is brought up, unlike the past, people didn't want to, tell who they voted for. They're not telling which side they're on. But today it seems like people are running, begging to tell you which side they're on. Now, don't check out on me, all right? Don't check out on me, because I've been reading something in a book from a popular Christian author, and I love what he said about politics in the church. And he takes a shot at both sides. So I felt like this was a pretty fair thing, both sides that he hits on in his book. But he basically takes this stance. You have to begin to separate yourself from political parties. And I love this sentence, and I got a slide with this quote on here. It says, "No politician anywhere is frustrated with the stubborn Christians in their district who refuse to align themselves publicly with their party and insist on behaving like their Lord. Consequently, unlike the original Christians, nobody is accusing us of becoming the members of the party of Christ. We blend in. We blend in." And he goes on and he takes some scripture from Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. This is in your bulletin as well if you was able to grab one this morning, verse 19 through 23. And I want you to really listen to what Paul says here. He says, "Though I am free, I belong to no one. I've made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak, I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings." Now, if Paul were to stand up here today and he were to preach that same message that he wrote, what do you think people would say? "Paul, you're a coward. You're a coward. Paul, you're a poser. You're a pretender. Paul, you can't even take a stand, right? Why don't you pick a side? Choose a side. You can't be in the middle, right? Can't be in the middle." But here's what Paul's saying throughout all that stuff. Paul's saying, I became whatever I needed to be for the sake of the gospel, to share the name of Jesus. Paul didn't get caught up in what the world wants him to be, what they were saying he should be. He just put Christ first, and he shared that with the people around him. And in today's world, that's an extremely difficult stance to take. Because when we pick a side, when you choose to pick a side, are you willing to alienate half of our community? Half of our community by siding with one political party over the other. And if people know which political party you support, but not which church you go to, then that's where the problem lies. How about we stand in the messy middle, kind of like Joe preached a couple weeks ago, where we're here to win over people to Christ, not political ideas, right? Don't get absorbed. And it's not just politics, right? I know I use that as an example, but you can fall into this trap in many things, right? Having the most money, being the most successful, having the biggest house, the best job, the most influence. You don't have to have all of those things because God created you to stand out, all right? Lastly, look on what Jesus says here on 14 through 16 in Matthew 5. It says, "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither people light a lamp or put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand. It gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." My third point this morning is Jesus tells us to be a light in the darkness. Be a light in the darkness. So as people traveled around these Judean cities in Jesus' day, many of them were built on hillsides, atop summits. And as you traveled from a very far distance, you could typically see these cities, especially of a night. And so what Jesus is saying is many eyes in this world. If you claim to be a Christ follower, you say, what makes you stand out? And you answer the question, I am a Christian. Then many eyes are going to be on you. And not only from just this wide area, right? Not just a hilltop on a place, but also he goes on and uses this illustration of a lamp not to be hidden. Lamp suggests a more intimate setting, right? Even the people closest to you in your own household are going to be looking at your examples, right? And basically, a Christian's actions cannot be hidden from either your families or the world. And we have a responsibility to influence those around us in just the way we live our everyday life. Now, do you know what effect light has on darkness? Right? It drives it away. Light and darkness literally cannot coexist. So everybody knows that. But as Christ follows, we're extensions of mercy. So when we talk about darkness in this world, we're talking about places where sin exists. Well, we're a light that can help drive that away. And that's why Jesus is saying, hey, you are a light. Then in verse 16, he gives us the whole reason why we're supposed to stand out, that we're supposed to live like salt and light. What gets people's attention, right? So we live like salt and light. Now we have people's attention. What's the goal here, right? So people see your good deeds, and then they attribute it to your Father in heaven. The goal is to see people to see our lives and realize that there's something different about us. And they turn around and they attribute that all to God. 1 Peter describes it kind of in a similar way, 2:12. He says, live in such a good lives among the pagans that they, even though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God the day he visits us. So 3 examples. Jesus, Peter, Paul, right, tells us that our lives have the potential to bring people into a relationship with God. Don't skip over that. Our lives have the potential to draw people into a relationship with God. That idea is such a powerful one. Our lives can be one of the ways that Jesus calls his people to experience him and his salvation. And it's hard to realize, but you really are a huge part, an important part of what his plan is, to make his name known to the world. And so as one of his children, God's going to work through you. He's going to bring people into your life to show himself through you. Your identity as a Christ follower is to truly commit yourself to seize all these opportunities that are placed before you and make a difference for God's glory. That is the idea behind the whole thing. And so I want to end with this graphic, and the band can go ahead and come on up. But it's just a very, very simple diagram. You'll see there in your bulletin there's four people you can have an influence on. And this is going to be a challenge to all of you. So family, friends, acquaintances, and strangers. Now, that encompasses about everyone, right? About everyone. You may say, well, family's pretty easy. Those are the people closest to me. But many of the people closest to us, they don't even have a saving relationship with Christ. And then all of us have friends who are in that same category, right, that we can have influence on and we talk to each and every day. Acquaintances, I may not know them, but I know who they are. And we may interact every now and then. Once again, there's the opportunity for you. And then you might say that last one, strangers. How can I have an impact on strangers? Well, the way you live your life, you display yourself, maybe all it takes is one conversation with those people for them to recognize Christ. All 4 groups, you can have an impact. Because here's the thing, each of these people represent individuals that God can lead into your life. God's at power behind it. You just have to take the challenge, right? And can you be an influence for God's glory? Because here's the challenge. Are you willing to be different? Are you willing to not get absorbed by all these worldly things that sometimes brings us down? And can you be a shining light so bright that people have even an opportunity? This idea of living your life in such a way, it's not even a suggestion. It's not a suggestion that you don't stand out. It's not here for the most spiritually mature among you. You think, well, I'm not ready yet. That's not the case. If you say, how can I stand out, and I am a Christian, you're ready. Right? You're ready. Because it's very essential, literally, right? Every one of your identities that's sitting here today, that God has this plan for you. And that's according to Jesus himself, right? He preached it back in the day, right? Don't miss the chance to use what God's given you. Don't miss the chance to use your life, your opportunities to grow God's kingdom, pointing people to him. Because you're created to stand out. Now, I want to take just a second here as we close. At the end of our service, I just want to invite you and those people standing at home, if you're here this morning and you're searching, maybe you feel like you don't have a purpose, maybe you're kind of confused on what that purpose is, but you have a Father who loves you, who created you to stand out too. And He's going to use you to do great things. And you can join that family, join that church this morning, right? If you just like to pray, maybe you've been a little bit confused about some things, you're having struggles, you've lost that purpose, that feeling, we can do that too. David will be here. We'd love to talk with you. We'll be right up front as we sing these songs.